The perfect neighbor, the pillar of the community. Some of history's most lethal killers have led a double life. One part Mr. Nice.
He was there smiling on the cover. He was the poster boy.
The other, homicidal maniac.
I got a killer, I got a killer, I got a killer.
Forensic psychologist Lou Schlesinger has spent decades delving into the minds of murderers.
The notion of a serial sexual murderer lives in his mother's basement, kills cats, is just incorrect.
Despite his jovial demeanor, Altemio Sanchez's start to life had been far from happy. As a child, he struggled academically, but Sanchez would insist his biggest challenge was out of school, living with his alcoholic mother.
She would frequently remind Al, you weren't wanted. She openly told him during his life, when she was pregnant with him, that she actually bought kind of a concoction of drugs that would induce an abortion and use those drugs during her pregnancy.
The unwanted child had been born into a turbulent home in 1958 in Puerto Rico.
He was one of 4 children. There was family tension between mom and dad, and I believe dad left when he was very young. I think he was 2 years old when dad left.
Good evening, and welcome to Up Close. And tonight we'll be studying the phenomena of serial killers. What exactly is a serial killer? By definition, a serial killer is someone who has killed over 3 people over a period of time with a cooling off period. There are several signs to look for a serial killer. It's called the serial killer triad. First would be starting fires, cruelty to animals, and as odd as it sounds, wetting the bed after 12 years old. That would be the definition, technically, of modern-day serial killers. The notion of the odd person hiding in the shadows is somewhat of a myth, and also the notion of a person with a high intellect. Most serial killers have an IQ of around 100, which would be just average. It's rare that they're very intelligent. Bundy was painted to be a brilliant lawyer, and actually, if Bundy had been a good attorney, he'd still be alive.
You're very close to your victim. You're going to be looking in their eyes, aren't you? You're going to be able to see what you're doing to them, aren't you?
That's correct.
Forensic psychologist Lou Schlesinger has analyzed the minds of some of history's most twisted serial killers. For him, the torturous technique carried out on Linda Yalem raises huge concerns.
When you use a ligature or manual strangulation to kill someone, that tells me it's personal, because it's an inefficient way to kill somebody. It takes a long time. They could fight their way out of it. So when you kill with strangulation, that is almost always a sexual element involved, because you're seeing the victim suffer.
Another myth in the serial killer studies is that these crimes are committed mostly by white males. This is not always the case. The worst serial killer in history was a woman. Her name was Elizabeth Bathory. She lived in Hungary in the 1500s and killed over 600 young girls. Modern-day programs about profiling are also not always correct. The shows like Criminal Minds, though very interesting, portray this as using ESP and flashes of intuition. Mostly these cases are solved by crime scene investigation, looking for blood spatters, looking for how the person was killed. Generally, if the person's hair has been cut, one would most likely be looking for a woman. A man would not do that type of a crime. They would usually do a sexual type of act. Although varying, there are three categories of victims in serial crimes: hitchhikers, runaways, and prostitutes. These are people who are vulnerable and most likely will not be missed. From my observations, environment doesn't play as large a role as is made out to be. Most people who are involved in this type of crime seem to be born more without a component, a sociopath. The sociopath, for the most part, is a person lacking a conscience. They feel no empathy or remorse for the victim. For the most part, though, serial killers are generally white males, usually in their early 20s to 30s. They would drive a non-noticeable but functional car. They would have a disarming demeanor.
Forensic psychologist Lou Schlesinger and serving detective Jackie Sabir are unraveling a case that rocked a suburb of Buffalo, New York. In 1990, Amherst student Linda Yalem was sadistically raped and strangled on a local bike path. For Jackie Sabir, the killer's movements reveal a meticulous operator.
This is an incredibly open public space, so for him to have the confidence to have staked out this location, knowing that he wouldn't be disturbed, starts really raising the levels of anxiety of the detectives. This wasn't a spontaneous assault. This was premeditated.
And it appeared the calculated killer may have struck before. His technique resembled an MO displayed in a series of sex attacks, perpetrated by a character dubbed the Bike Path Rapist.
The Bike Path Rapist first became known to me when I was a teenager. A girl from my high school had gotten raped.
He would prey in areas where there were either high schools or recreational areas that would, younger women would typically utilize.
Sometimes serial killers will stalk their victims for a considerable period of time, sometimes up to a year. BTK was thought to have stalked his first victim for over a year in the Otero case. Serial killers will sometimes keep souvenirs also. In fact, most of the time they do, so they can relive the crime over and over. Police will withhold evidence in order to identify this person, knowing that there's only one person who knows the actual circumstances in which the person was killed.
Cheektowaga is an incredibly safe, quiet suburb, low crime, and it's great schools, and that's why Sanchez and his wife picked this location to raise their family.
He had 2 sons. He was very involved in his community. Nothing remarkable about him. He just seemed like a neighbor.
He was the guy that, when snowfall came, he'd be out there with his snowplow plowing out your driveway.
He was a member of his local church community where he was coaching the softball league. His family were well known. He was here for a long time, so he'd established ties.
Serial killers will also try and insert themselves into the police case. In the case of Bill Suff in Riverside County, he was quite involved in following what the police were doing. Also, John Wayne Gacy followed the case very closely. A lot of them will actually follow the case in the papers.
Whilst Altemio Sanchez presented himself as remorseful, other killers who deceived all around them have played out their final acts of freedom in different ways. Gary Ridgway quietly faced his victims.
How do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree, as charged in count 5?
Guilty.
Dennis Rader reveled in detailing his heinous crimes.
got on top of her and then strangled her with a belt at that time.
But to fully appreciate these cold-blooded killers, Professor Lou Schlesinger believes you have to look to the past.
If you want to understand an offender, don't go by how he appears in court. Take a look at what he did. What he did tells you what the offender is really like.
One particular thing to look at is a person's driving record and their credit card records. If a person is driving from Washington to Oregon to Nevada to Colorado, that's very suspicious. It means they're probably trolling for victims. This is something I personally would look for.
And Altemio Sanchez's brutal history undoubtedly bears the hallmarks of this most dangerous class of killer. The guy next door who was simply invisible.
Sanchez shares a characteristic of many serial sexual murderers. These offenders are in a class of their own inasmuch as those who see them in their environment, and they don't see somebody who's mentally ill, who's psychotic, yet they all have a dark side and they're extremely dangerous and extremely violent, although the average person doesn't see it.
Would serial killers be classified as mentally ill? Most likely not. Most serial killers are fully cognizant of what they've done, and as I pointed out, do collect souvenirs and relish in them. This shows a cognizance.
When I got through having a climax with her, I jumped on her.
How much are you pulling on her neck?
I'm pulling really hard on her neck.
How?
Just like this.
What are you saying to her?
Don't fight, and I'll let you go.
No, Ridgway was never going to let him go. He got him in a strangulation hold, and he basically said to them, if you relax and just let me go through my little sexual thing, I'm going to let you go. And when she relaxed, he then strangled her and killed her.
I'm feeling, I gotta kill her, I gotta kill her, I gotta kill her.
They want to get close and touch the person as she's dying. This is what's stimulating for all of these individuals, like Gary Ridgway and Long, and so many of them who kill with that method.
Will the phenomena of serial crimes be solved within our lifetimes? Probably not. There seems to be no real explanation for this type of phenomenon. This is a sociopath that you're dealing with no remorse and no conscience.
And your first impressions of him, he was just a normal guy?
Normal guy, very nice guy, soft-spoken. I can't say anything bad about him.
Was Sanchez ever in trouble at work, or were there any issues?
He was a good worker.
Yeah. Was there any gossip about him, or rumours?
He was good with the church, the community, his family belonged to the church. He's a great guy.
Nobody in Buffalo believed that Altemio Sanchez had anything to do with the murder of Linda Yalen. Having worked extensively with the FBI, Professor Lou Schlesinger is fully aware that for many, a serial killer is hard to spot.
The notion of every serial sexual murderer being weird and a loner, lives in his mother's basement and, kills cats is just incorrect.
That's the end of part 1 of my series on serial killers. Thank you for viewing, and have a good evening. My name is Andrew West. Good night.